Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the University of Illinois Extension's Local Government Information and Education Network Tele-Institute. Today's topic is going to be Special Purpose Property Assessments. I will repeat again, we will be taking questions as they come up. Please unmute yourself by pressing 5 on your phone. You may also ask questions via the chat box, and we'll try to field those as they come in. I'm going to be your facilitator today. My name is Zach Kennedy. I've been with Extension since 2009. I'm a community and economic development educator serving Champaign, Stuard, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties. My educational background is I hold a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's in urban and regional planning, and I'm working on a PhD in regional planning here at the university. I provide programming in community leadership development, participatory community planning, organizational development, and community and economic development. So our agenda for today, I've made my welcome and opening remarks, and then we have the pleasure of having Gene Stuard, who is a principal with Forrestal Group. He's going to be doing a presentation on Introduction to Special Purpose Properties. So we'll hear from him, and then we'll have some closing remarks. Some of the folks who are in charge of the Certified County Officials Program, we have Ann Silvis, who is the Interim Community and Economic Development Program Leader with U of I Extension. Her contact information is featured here on the slides. And then we also have Monica Hammerschmidt, who is in charge of, when you send in your attendance sheet and evaluation forms, please send them to Monica. All of her contact information, her mailing address, and fax information is here within the presentation. Here are just a few tips for effective teleconferencing. I'll let you peruse those for a second. Again, it's very important that we get the sign-in sheets and the evaluations mailed back so that your officials can get credit towards their CCO certification. Upcoming tele-institutes on April 19th, we're going to have a session on siting and permitting of wind farms in Illinois. Again, that'll be from 3 to 5 p.m. And that will wrap up our spring series of tele-institutes. Okay, and now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. We have both Gene Stuard and Robert Sneed here with us. They've traveled all the way from Evansville, Indiana to be here physically with me in my office, and I haven't met a couple gentlemen who are so smart and funny in a very long time. And they're really experts on doing special purpose property assessments, so we're really privileged to have them. Gene Stuard resides in Evansville, Indiana with his wife of 50 years, Shirley. Mr. Stuard has 5 sons, 4 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. He is engaged in real estate-related business since 1972. Mr. Stuard is a certified general appraiser and a real estate broker in Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. In 1989, he made a career change to focus on special purpose type assignments, such as environmentally related properties, highway condemnation work, and property tax situations. Some of the major assignments have been the valuation of such properties as steel manufacturing plants, Superfund site damages to adjacent properties, industrial manufacturing plants, and golf courses. Mr. Stuard served as the Chief Consultant Appraiser to the Kentucky Department of Revenue in the early 2000s and assisted the state in assessment valuation on the local and county level and for the Kentucky Board of Tax Appeals. The type of properties consisted of complex and special purpose properties, the very type that we're here to talk about today. He has also worked with numerous counties in Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois on special assignments. Mr. Stuard has served his community in over 20 different civic and social organizations and also served as the past national president of the National Association of Independent Fee Appraisers and past national president of the National Association of Environmental Risk Auditors. He has authored numerous courses and instructed real estate appraisal courses in over 30 states. So in sum, we're really fortunate to have Mr. Stuard and his expertise here with our program. And so with that, I'm going to load up his presentation, and he'll take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think my speaker's on, so I can start. I tell you, I think my wife would love this system when she would be talking to me and want me to listen. I think this is great. Bob, go ahead, please. The presentation we're going to deliver to you today is the introduction of special purpose properties, and obviously it's through the university here, and I'll go on through this to get to the next slide because we've already talked about these things. There is some information on our location and phone numbers and so forth, and you'll see more of that in the rear. You'll see that in the rear also. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that if you have questions that we don't get addressed in this webinar, if you will give me a call, you'll have the information in the back of the presentation. I'll be glad to spend time with you and answer those questions. I'll be glad to do that as a courtesy to you because I know we're really working on a short timetable here. The presentation we're going to do is basically tied into a 4-day seminar that we did for a Russian delegation of appraisers in Miami, Florida back a couple of years ago. And I've chosen 2 or 3 of those topics and condensed them down, also added some other things that's pertinent specifically to Illinois. But when I was asked to do the presentation, and I got to thinking about the complexity of the subject and the folks that we're going to have sitting out there participating, I'm reminded of the guy dying and going to heaven. And he walked up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter is sitting there, and they introduce each other, and he goes on to say, you know, we're having a banquet tonight. And he said, you're a speaker, you've given a lot of speeches when you was on earth. I'd like you to take a spot on the program and do a short presentation for us. And he said, it's absolutely no problem. He said, what am I speaking on? He said, well, you're speaking on the Great Flood. And he said, okay. And said, what, as a part of that, what I need to know, what do I need to be concerned about? He said, well, Noah's going to be in the audience. So when I got this assignment, if you would, I got to thinking about the group of people that's sitting out there sharing this with me, and I tell you, I've met a number of county officials throughout the state of Illinois, and some of the sharpest people I've ever met been on some of those boards. So I'm a little bit humble with that. But with that in mind, let's start with our introduction and our goals. We're going to be talking about the definition of special purpose property. We're going to be talking about units of measure, and we're going to be looking at some examples of special purpose properties. And finally, we're going to be doing some mini studies. I selected a couple of different properties that we can give some overviews on, and there's no way we can begin to cover this subject the way it should be covered in this period of time. But again, don't forget to call me and ask me the questions, and don't forget to participate in the webinar as we go. So with that in mind, I want to put out just a little bit of a disclaimer. I may be talking about some specific properties, a couple of them maybe, in Illinois. Anything I talk about, you can rest assured, is a matter of public record. And in addition to that, anything I talk about, I have personally contacted the supervisor of assessments and got their okay to make these discussions. So it's important from your perspective and the understanding of what I have of your background and what you do with the county is that you know that any work like this has to be done on a very confidential basis, and that I treat.
Again, I'd like to just interject that we are taking questions during the presentation, and you can submit your questions either via the chat function or by pressing #5 to unmute your speaker and just go ahead and ask. We'd like this to be conversational.
Okay, the definition of a special purpose property is a property. Now, this is a property that is defined by the Appraisal Institute directory. A property with a unique physical design, special construction material, or a layout that particularly adapts its utility to the use for which it was built, also called a special design property. So when you carry that definition forward to what we're going to be talking about, keep that in mind. Now, one of the things, obviously, from the assessment standpoint, is that in Illinois, as you all know, you have a market value that's determined some way or the other, but one of the types of approaches are otherwise, or sale prices. You have an assessed value, which is essentially 1/3 of the market value, which becomes the assessed value that the tax rate is applied to. And then, if you're dealing with appeals coming into the county, as an example, you generally are going to be looking at those appeal dates on the valuation as what we call a retrospective appraisal or a retrospective appeal value. That means something done before today's date, back in time. A current value is today's date, and a prospective value is what you expect it to be, the value on a property, say, in the future sometime, as defined by that certain date or by certain sets of conditions. Moving on, I want to give a little bit of background on a thing called units of comparison. And the reason that this is important is that properties are typically valued on the basis of either the income that it produces or based upon the physical use of the property. As an example, an investor might buy a property for the income it produces. A manufacturer might buy that property for the physical square feet or cubic feet that they get as a result of that use. An example of units of measure, and these apply to different types of properties. Examples of units of measure is square footage. That might apply to a warehouse or manufacturing plant or a resident property. A cubic feet, which would apply to something like a warehouse or manufacturing plant with extremely high ceilings, like 30 or 40 feet high, where a typical warehouse might have a 20-foot ceiling. Front feet might apply to a commercial site along a major boulevard. Cubic yard might apply to, say, for instance, the space in a landfill. A calculated unit of measure might apply to, let's say, where there's a formula that's developed like you would have to use in assessing coal mines. For that unit of measure would be what that formula produces. And in general, that would produce an acre of equalized assessment value. A unit, which might be an apartment or maybe a storage unit. An acre, which is self-explanatory. A site might be for, say, a McDonald's or a CVS store, something of that nature. A space could be valued per space for let's say a parking garage space, or even a cemetery lot, believe it or not, would fall in that category. And obviously, golf courses are valued on a round. Golf courses sell, for instance, so much per round played each year, or per hole, or per acre, as an example. Now, if any questions of anybody at this point? Okay, let's move on. When you're looking at most properties that particularly are leased or rented, like warehouses or shopping centers or that sort of property, manufacturing plants, hotels are an example, Ethan, nursing homes. You start first by looking at what we call potential gross income. Now, this is very elementary appraisal introduction, so don't be offended if I'm using it. I'm wanting to kind of get everybody on the same page with this. But your potential gross income is all the income that property will produce if it's fully occupied at the market rents with no vacancy, 100% occupied. Now, from there, we know that most properties are not 100% occupied. However, most special purchase properties don't fall into this category quite like some others do. But then you have, after you take off vacancy collection, you look at the other income that that property might produce. Like if, for instance, if it's a nursing home, you might look at the Coke machine, as an example, a laundry facility, those sort of things. Once you do that and subtract out those two factors, you get what we call effective gross income. From there, we look at the real estate taxes and the insurance, which are called fixed expenses. We look at the general operating expenses, which are things like the utility bills, the telephone, the management, the salaries, janitorial service, and those sort of things. And we look at what we call a reserve for replacement. That means that if this property has a 50-year life left, then we got to take out of the income about 2% of the value, thereabout, in order to be able to rebuild this thing when it completely wastes away. And that gives you the net operating income. From there, we're able to apply a thing called capitalization. In order to apply capitalization, you have to have a capitalization rate. And I'm sure that you've heard the term, or the IRV formula. That's the IRV. That means that if you know what the income is, you know what the rate is, you can divide the rate into the income and get an estimate of what the property value is. This is one of the techniques that's used called the income approach. We get this rate from different sources. Appraisers can extract this rate out of the marketplace by taking sales of other properties, by taking the income of that property and dividing the sale price into the income and get that rate. So, or we can build it to a thing called band of investment using market and financial data from sophisticated formulas like the Elwood of mortgage equity, debt coverage ratio, which comprises of a mortgage percentage and a mortgage ratio, and the debt percentage, as an example, or residual methods, or we can build a rate considering all different types of factors. Now, realize that that is very brief on something we might cover in a 2 or 3 day seminar, but again, this is a process that your assessor goes through sometime to determine the value on a typical property. Rate components. If I say, for instance, that I've got a $10,000 income and I've developed a rate of 10%, that rate is going to include getting my investment back over time, a return on my investment while I got invested, some small percentage for managing that investment, and some small percentage for risk factors involved, and some small percentage for reserve for replacement to replace my money. So those are what a rate contains, and here's how it works. A direct capitalization formula is the value equals the income divided by the rate. The value we don't know, divided by the rate. The value is the net income divided by the rate. Therefore, the value in this case is, what is that? Should be $1 million. So if we got, or 100,000, well, I think I got a typo there. So 10% into, is that 10,000? 100,000. That's 100,000, I'm sorry. I'm reading something that's about 20 feet from me, so hang with me here. At any rate, that value would be like $1 million. Now, again, that's a generic type, a real simple introduction to it, but it gives you an idea that there is a way to value a property by what we call the income approach. Bob, go ahead. I'm taking a water break here. By the way, I've got a terrible case of allergy, and my voice is almost in the laryngitis. Laryngitis, is that what it's called? Yeah, I'm not a real sophisticated person. If you ever meet me in person, you'll find that out. But my voice is close to that. And so I'm hoping that I get through this thing. I'm drinking lemon juice. I'm drinking all type of cough syrup and water. And Bob Sneed, if I have to get away from the mic for a minute, he's going to figure out a way to take this thing forward until I can get back to it. So please bear with me. It's nothing I can control. I'll do the best I can. I appreciate your tolerance on it. But some examples of special purpose properties would be a large industrial plant like a million square foot tire manufacturer or something like that. A industrial plant with like a mega warehouse with maybe 1 million square feet, or maybe a combination of 500,000 square feet of manufacturing, and maybe 1 million square foot of warehouse. We did an assignment in Kentucky for Continental Tire Company that had 2.3 million square feet of property and of buildings. And so when you get into that type of size of property, you're getting into a whole different line of research and those sorts of things. The next one would be like a retail big box shopping complex, golf courses, for instance. And we're going to take a few of these in a few minutes, and we're going to discuss them in more detail. A power plant, as an example. Coal mines. For more continuation here is environmentally impacted properties, where you take the chemical spills and so forth. Low-income subsidized housing. Go ahead. Convenience stores. Hospitality, hotels, resorts, hospital, medical, senior care. Churches, as an example, is no longer being used as a church, but has a change of use into an office building or whatever. So we're going to get into our mini studies. Bob, go ahead. And I guess we need to go one more further. Does anybody have any questions yet?
Please press #5 to unmute your microphone and ask questions directly, or you may type it in the chat box and I'll ask it. Okay.
One of the subjects that we just recently had the pleasure of working with Montgomery County and Ray Dunster and their board there. And by the way, those group of folks are absolutely progressive, and that's a good thing. In the way they look at these type of properties and the way they move forward in knowing that they can reassess these properties, and I'll give you a couple of examples as we go. But recently they had a new coal mine open in Montgomery County. And one of the things you have to consider in a lot of these properties is that personal property is exempted in the state, and oftentimes in some of these properties that we'll talk about later, it's not uncommon to see personal property not exempted out at the county level. So that's something to talk about. But the challenge to develop these factors in assessing and a procedure in assessing coal mines, it gets pretty interesting. One of the things you have to know, and I talked to a gentleman, and his name will come to me from Williamson County not long ago, very knowledgeable assessor, and I'm embarrassed that I don't have his business card with me, but he's also got a handle on this stuff pretty good. But one of the things you need to do is determine the average coal seam, and you need to identify the land and the type of use or use for coal production that may be coming from that. So, Bob, move on. By the way, I'm talking to my chauffeur who is operating my computer, and thank God he drives his car, but he's operating his computer. So if I'm talking to him and telling him to go back or forward or whatever, I'm just trying to get to where I know what I'm talking about on the screen. The types of land use, though, is you could have barren acres. You could have acres of coal that's been mined out. You could have acres of coal that's simply not profitable to mine or unminable. You could have undeveloped acres, and you could have acres of coal that are in the process of being developed. Now, once you get this type of information, you then assign a dollar value to each one of those groups except the developed acres. As an example, your barren acres, you got 100 acres in this tract, for instance, it may be only $1 to $5 an acre. Your undeveloped acres might be, according to Illinois section, down at the bottom of this overhead or this PowerPoint, might be $75 an acre. At the bottom of the PowerPoint slide, there is a reference that all of the information that I'm going to be talking about comes from. Then, for developed acres, you have to get into a formula that's also spelled out in the Illinois law. Now, I had the opportunity to do this assessment, or helping the county with setting up to assess this property, I should say, and developing a procedure form. I had the pleasure of meeting several assessors from across the state, and I also visited with the Illinois Appraisal Division. And so this is current information that's been read by your state appraisal division that says that we're on target with what we're telling you. Now, go ahead. So what you have to do in developing this coal formula is to get your tons per acre. Now, recognize that your tons per acre is calculated at 1,742 tons per acre. That's just what the state calculates it at. That ties together with the coal seam thickness as a part of the process. The recovery rate of what you expect, what the mining company expects to recover out of that seam, the spot price of coal, then you can develop a annual income from the coal, and you look at it over a 5-year period and discount it to a present value and apply an assessment ratio. Now, with that said, let's go to the next slide, and this is an example. We've got a coal mine that's got a seam thickness of 6 feet. They believe that 50% is what can be recovered. The spot price on this is developed, in this case, by the way, that $20.82 is not the spot price in Illinois today. It's an example. We then do a 5 years annual income for 5 years, and then we break it down to an annual income per year. Now, let me start at the top. So we got 1,742 tons per acre. We got a 6-foot seam. That gives us 10,452 tons per acre, considering a 6-foot depth. We then take 50% of that. That gives us 52.26. We then take the spot price and multiply it by 4%. Now, by the way, this is in the state law, the state formula for doing this. You just have to go through a lot of work and call banks to get the interest rate we use, to call different coal companies to get the spot price, and do a lot of extra work. But anyway, the 5-year income in this case is $4,300. We divide the income to get 1 year of income per acre is $870. And we'll move on. Then we take that times the present value of 1 per period on a 5 years rate developed from a formula, which is the present worth of one formula at the bank rates that you have to do research on, plus 3%, to get that rate that you discount that at, if I'm making any sense at all. So let me say that again. Once you get your annual income from that acre, you then discount that to a present value at a rate that you get from taking 3% and adding that to the average of 3 banks that is stated to make that the discount rate, okay? That rate then becomes, let's go back, that rate becomes you just don't move until I tell you to now. He's driving around corners and I ain't to yet. Now, once we get that, then we have a coal reserve value per acre. That's a market value. Then we apply your assessment ratio, and now we have, in this case, $1,111.34 is the equalized assessed value per acre. If you got that, you're some kind of sharp, because I expect you do have it. most of the assessors got a pretty good handle on this stuff. But in the event you need to tweak your process, this is how you tweak it. Now, in working with the Illinois Department of Revenue Appraiser section, they're going to be, if they haven't already, they're going to be developing this dollar factor that you see here, $1,111.34, and putting it on their website each year. So all you have to do is go to it and not run through all these formulas. They're going to call the banks and get all the rates. I'm being a lifesaver to you if you're doing it the hard way. They're going to call the banks and get the rates. They're going to get the discount rates. They're going to do all this procedure, and on their website, they're going to have that number to apply to undeveloped coal. That cool or not? Okay. Any questions on this one?
Again, #5 to unmute your microphone, or type your question in the chat box. Any questions?
We okay? Again, at the end of the session, I'm going to put my names and numbers up there, and you can also get them from a webinar, from what I understand, and we'd be glad to share with you. It was a delight working with Montgomery County on this, because frankly, I started the assignment, and what I knew, I wasn't satisfied with. So we started it from scratch, and I think this will be a big help to you if you've got coal mines in your area. And give me a call if you have questions. The next thing we're going to talk about is electric power plants. I would say this: if you have a power plant in your jurisdiction and you haven't reviewed this thing in the last few years, maybe you need to. I'm going to be careful with the way I preference this, not the next statement, but a little bit later on. In assessing a power plant, you have to consider the personal property as being a non-taxable or exempt, and it's a huge number in a power plant. And you have to consider environmentally qualified property, which can also be a huge number, which the taxpayer reports directly to the state, and it's assessed at, I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, maybe like 5% of your regular assessment or something like this. In other words, that environmentally qualified property that is qualified as a portion of the power plant that deals with their environmental control, their control of emission and things of this nature, is assessed at a different rate in Illinois, because these things are assessed differently in every state. They're assessed at a different rate in Illinois than your regular real property. So those are two things you got to consider, and that can be like millions of dollars. It's not a small number. We had the pleasure of working with Montgomery County again, and they asked us to assist them in the reassessment of a power plant in their county. And this power plant, this is public record, by the way, and I've also got clearance to discuss this today. So Ray Durston of the Montgomery County is a person you can call on any of these other questions you might have, but their power plant hadn't been assessed for a number of years. And it was currently, the market value was about $107 million, which means the assessment was $35 million or thereabouts. We were hired to step in and help the assessor and take over, if you would, help with negotiations, help with the evaluation, and we came into the county as an advocate for the county, stepping in for the assessor. Any appraisal work we did, we contracted that out to an independent party. Any other expert help that we needed from this, we also contracted that out to an independent party. So the county had a direct contract with us, which, by the way, is a public record also. of what we would do and how we would do it. And we ended up completing this work. We ended up working, matter of fact, we spent about a day with the power companies, if you would, people from the home office and attorneys in negotiating down the final figures on it, but it's currently assessed at about $250 million. And the assessment increased, the actual assessment increased by about $50 million. And if you can figure that out with a 7-8% tax rate, it was a pretty good taxable base for the county. The other thing that was done to stabilize this, we reached agreement with the power plant and the attorneys representing them to apply a 10-year assessment to it, which with the economy dealing the way it's been done and the way we projected it might go, was a very good decision for the county. So if we were looking at assessing a power plant, those same type of things like cost approach or sales comparisons or income approach would apply. They're just more complex. As an example, the cost approach on that type of equipment and building is unbelievably expensive because of the structure and the way that it's built. The sales comparison approach is based on finding comparable sales, if you would, of power plants, and we were able to, through our appraiser, generate about 18 or 20 comparable sales that actually told us what power plants were selling for per foot for kilowatt per hour and those other type things, and then an analysis was done on the income that's produced from the power plant with special formulations and capitalization rates and so forth. So I can't get much deeper into this other than to give you an example, other than to say that it can be done, and other than to be sure that you know that personal property and environmentally impacted components are assessed at a different rate altogether. Bob, would you go ahead? If there are questions, anybody?
Any questions in the field?
Are we ready to go?
Okay, we're going to move on.
Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is golf courses or country clubs. And we've done this work in several states. I've been very fortunate to have worked with the state of Indiana on highway condemnation and that sort of thing, working with the state of Kentucky for over 2 years on assessing their more complex properties and representing them as a state before the state board, and also doing some other complex work in this regard. But assessing golf courses and country clubs, you basically assess those utilizing income and expenses and capitalization rates that we talked about. One measure of assessing a golf course is what a golf course sells for per round of golf play. As an example, if you get into a big club up in, and there's basically three different types of clubs. There's your country club, there is your public links, and then there is your semi-private, which have country club members, and then it's open to the public. A lot of data from the National Golf Foundation can be obtained, a lot of data in the marketplace. But, for instance, you've got a course here in Illinois that has, where it's played, let's say, 20,000 18-hole rounds of golf per year. And you've got another one that's over here somewhere else that plays 30,000 rounds per year. Those rounds translate out into actual dollars of income, so your sell price per round may be the same at both courses, but one's going to sell for 50% more than the other one does. So it's a unit of measure, if you would. Also, another unit of measure is the square foot of buildings and outbuildings, the square foot of greens, as an example, the number of yards that the course might play, The longer it is, the more it costs to build, the more it's worth. The sell price per acre, and actually, if you got 18 holes, the sell price that it might sell per green or per hole that's played. So there's several components that come into this. Most of the difficulty in assessing golf courses is finding the data to apply to the subject course that you're assessing. You may have a little 9-hole course in your county, and it may be worth $30,000 a hole, but 9-hole golf course in the next county that's got more amenities, it's got watered fairways, it's got watered greens, that have irrigation on the greens and the fairways and so forth, that have different grasses, for instance, on the fairways and the greens, may sell for different money. So the trick is that you have to do a tremendous amount of research to find comparable properties. And the worst thing you can do is compare a country club with a 9-hole and say, well, these sell for $60,000, $100,000 a hole, and lo and behold, your little 9-holer that public that's only played 10,000 rounds a year, not going to sell for that. So your assessment has to be tied with market data and then analyze the income and expenses that it might have. And I find in most of your communities, your smaller courses and your smaller country clubs are barely getting by. So just food for thought. They are barely getting by based on research that we've done. Let's go ahead. Environmentally impacted property. Let me give you an example. You've got a 300,000 square foot heated and air conditioned warehouse or manufacturing plant. It's impacted by chemical spill. That just changed use from being a heated and air conditioned warehouse or manufacturing plant perhaps to a cold storage warehouse. Now, before it was contaminated, it might have been leasing for $3 a square foot or $4 a square foot or whatever. Per year, after it was contaminated, it might be leasing for $1 a square foot. So the income had dropped down to a third or a fourth of what it was, and in addition to that, your capitalization rate is going to be higher, and as a result of that, your overall value is going to tank out on you. And we've had a tremendous amount of experience dealing with this. I've got 3 or 4 examples I'll talk about in a moment, but anytime that you are dealing with a contaminated site, that could be a convenience store, a quick lube oil change place, a garage that they've worked as a mechanic, and chemical plants, as an example, where they use chemicals. You could have that type of a problem, and you've got to be exceedingly careful also health-wise. You don't want to go in there without knowing the risk that you're taking from a standpoint of a closed-up building that might have had a chemical spill. I'm going to stop there for a second and see if there's any questions, because this is a bigger problem than probably most people realize.
Please submit your questions in the chat box or press pound 5 to unmute your phone.
3 or 4 cases that we've been involved in is a project called the White River Fish Kill that started in Anderson, Indiana, on White River, and took up 50 miles of waterfront, lakefront, river, along 3 counties from Anderson through downtown, or I should say west side of Indianapolis. It was a well-publicized case at the time. We were hired to come in and do a mass evaluation, which consisted of 1,250 properties on both sides, or over 1,250 total. We had businesses, we had manufacturing, we had single-family residential, expensive single-family residential, and for our study, when they had this fish kill, it was a chemical release, and over 200,000 tons of fish were destroyed, with the projection that it would take 5 years to restore the river whereby it could be used for recreational purposes and the fish stock would be replenished by experts from Indiana University and a lot of other places. Our job was to assess the damages to each one of those properties, considering they had lost the use of the river, they had lost the recreational use, they had a certain stigma attached to their property, and considering the 5 years. And we presented our report to the judge in the courts there in Indianapolis, and essentially it was about a 10% per year loss in value, discounted to present value on the 1,250 houses. So if you, yes.
We have a question, Gene, from a Janice. She says, how would one assess the value of a brownfield site?
Very carefully, because what you really need to do in this case is to look at the type of contamination, look at the time that it would be able to be used for the site that they're going to put on the brownfield. As an example, there's a number of things that can be put on a brownfield site that the contamination, it just may mean that they have to clear off 3 or 4 inches of topsoil, as an example. And you have very little, if the water tables are not up, as an example. So if you got groundwater involved, excuse me, it's a whole different problem. Not only for the brownfield site, but also for off-site contamination on other properties. So making the assumption that the contamination is contained on the site and to the site, making the assumption that the environmental agency says that it is suitable and usable for a certain type of use, then you can look at how long it's going to take before it can be used for that and assess it as an interim use until it starts to be used for that purpose, like manufacturing a warehouse or that sort of thing. It takes into consideration there's not a lot of comparable data out there. You can get case studies on it, but the biggest thing is to determine how long the site's going to be out of use, how long it's going to be able to, and I'm not suggesting that it's worthless. I've found very few contaminated sites that's totally worthless. It's worth something to somebody. I have found them to where they're down to really zero, but not negative. We did a piece of work for the state of Ohio back in the 90s on a hazardous waste landfill, and the other side on it, we were working with the county. The other side on that case wanted a $42 million negative value that they could carry forward for the future on other sites. And we ended up, I think, with about a $15, $16 million value or something on a positive, because it was still producing a whole lot of money. And the contamination was contained, and the money was in place in that site once it closed, to put the cap over it, if you would, and monitor the site. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but come back if I have not, and ask something else to clarify for me. I'm assuming I maybe answered your question. If I didn't, call me at the end of the program. I am volunteering to take 30 minutes and devote it to anybody who calls me at no cost to answer any questions that you might have about anything. So if I don't get it answered here, give me a personal phone call. I do a little money coming in deal that tells you you're saving money at the end of the session. But right after that, get the name and address and call me if you have questions. I'm hoping I answered your question. If not, give me a call. From a standpoint of the assessor, though, if you've got a neighborhood that's contaminated, then you need to look at those houses because, again, we worked with, in the state of Alabama years ago and actually wrote an article on what we call Lay Lake, Alabama, that's been used in hundreds of legal litigation cases on the Lay Lake and contaminating 40 acres of prime resort type of properties. And what we determined after doing studies, base studies, off-site studies, studies 4 miles away, studies on the lake, studies 1 house back, and those things, we found that while the state had their fine on that property, that it was not usable until the time that the contamination cleared away. Lake, Alabama, residence law was failed before, we did this was failed before the contamination, during the contamination, and refilled after the contamination. It was about a 2-year study, and I used, I think, 6 or 7 university students that put in over 10,000 hours on this thing. So that determined that contaminated properties and adjacent properties suffer, and again, we found that there was a loss of value of about 10% a year. So if it's assessed at $100,000 and it's been contaminated for 3 years and it goes on the market, you can just almost rest assured there's going to be a $30,000, $40,000 markdown, because people are taking risks for the stigma effects and so forth. Anyway, Conoco Oil Company called me one day, and we went to Lafayette, Louisiana, and they had bought 40 acres of run-down parts of the city, and they were going to put. I'm being careful with my words, but it was just ready to be tore down, and they bought the 40 acres, and they hired contractors to come in and tear down the houses and to clear the site and haul off the dirt. Well, we've got this innovative type of people in Lafayette, Louisiana. And so the trucking company that they hired to haul off the dirt decided this would be a good weekend practice for them, so they started running ads in the newspaper selling the dirt that they were picking up from this tear down of these old houses. So lo and behold, there was class action litigation against Conoco. And what happened is they were selling this dirt to people that were doing landscaping on the new houses, or maybe the old mobile home sites or whatever, and they were just pocketing a bunch of money at $100, $150 a load. They don't know how many thousands of tons that they sold, but it came out that this dirt was contaminated with transite asbestos. So we were called in to help Conoco do some damage control. And after we got into our work, because this was a class investigation, after we got into the work, we recommended that Conoco go in with their permission, strip the land down completely, get certification, no longer contaminated, put in new landscaping. Honestly, there's some $15,000 mobile homes in Lafayette, St. Charles, where this was. In St. Charles, Louisiana, that's probably got $15,000 landscaping. Beautiful trees, grass-free sold the whole bit. But what happened, it controlled the damage and the stigma effect, because the contamination was removed, and the orchards were replanted, and the dirt was replanted, and medical checks were done on people that wanted them, and there was only 3 or 4 medical complaints about it, but it saved that company a huge amount of money. But if they had not come in there and done that, and you were assessing that 100 properties or whatever, there's a real stigma involved with this that needs to be dealt with on what we call a cost to cure, and that's redo what Conoco did on each one of these properties. So you could have a 15, 20, 25, 30% cost to cure in that case, and we're all kind of familiar with that term. So that's another example. Another example would be in Indianapolis. There was a Shell oil station, a Shell service station, sitting on this corner, and immediately, just a little bit downgrading from that, there was a meat market and a daycare center. Well, today, that meat market and daycare center is gone, and Shell owns an empty lot that they use for parking, because that's the only use you could use that lot for once it got contaminated. It might have been able to have been used for some other type of garage or something like this. Excuse me. But that's an example of another case. I'm going to take a 15-second break. You sit back, and I'm kind of trying to figure out how these radio hosts do this stuff. but I'm gonna take a 15-second break, get me a drink of water, and then we'll go to the next one. So take a 15-second break. Answer the question while you're sitting there. I don't know if any of you have ever had allergies or not, but they just drive me crazy. And I do a lot of speaking, and I've cut down on a lot of it because of this. But I just couldn't. This guy, Zach, he's persistent, man. And he finally said, just please, please, please. So I'm here. But please bear with me on the allergy problem. Another example was a gasoline spill. Happened a few years ago in Bowling Green, Kentucky. There was a Buck gasoline plant that had a spill of several thousand gallons of gasoline. They estimated 8,000 to 10,000 gallons of gasoline into the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. And that odor, if you would, or fumes, got into hundreds of homes in Bowling Green to the point that they were putting pipes in the basement to pump the fumes out of the basement and so forth. Well, if that type of thing happened in your community, you've got to consider you need to consider the fact that those homes don't have a market. People are not going to buy those homes, and the only way they're going to buy them is to get a really heavy discount price and wait for the problem to be solved, kind of like a lot of people are buying foreclosures today. They're buying them on the basis of hopefully the market will improve, and therefore I'll make some money down the road. So those are 4 or 5 examples of environmentally impacted property.
Okay, I think this is a good point for us to take about a 5-minute break. We'll let Gene get another sip of water and rest his voice up a little bit. If anyone has any questions that they can think of in the meantime, please put them in the chat box, and we'll see you back here at 2 after 4. Welcome back from the break. We're going to resume the program now. Thank you.
You know, let me start this part of the program with asking you that if you've got a question, don't hesitate to ask it, because I can promise you, if you've got a question, there's probably half the folks out there that got the same question, and they just don't want to slow things down or interrupt me. And trust me, I've raised 5 boys and all kind of grandkids, and you can't interrupt me. So just give it your best shot. But do ask your questions, and if you need to go back and ask a question on something we've already talked about, that's perfectly fine. We're going to have plenty of time for question and answers at the end of the session also. The next topic is low-income subsidized housing. Illinois doesn't have the same problem with this as a lot of states do, because the state of Illinois has, and this is my understanding of reading your laws on it, is basically fairly straightforward in the way you assess low-income housing, and that's pretty well mandated by state law from what I understand. And if there's anybody out there that is where I'm wrong on that, I would certainly appreciate your coming in and letting us know that. But we do, and we have, this is one of the areas that we do a lot of work in for a lot of the counties and a lot of property owners, and we got involved in this type of work on low-income subsidized housing back in when I was doing work for the state of Kentucky. Vince Lang at that time was the commissioner, and Tom Crawford, the property evaluation division, head of that, and he's still there, by the way. Vince has now moved up in the state, but they asked me one day to attend a meeting that they were having over there, and we walked into that room, and there were at least 40, 50 people. People from USDA, people from the bank, people from I think there's 15 or 20 property evaluation administrators, which are the assessor for Kentucky, and Secretary of State and all four, and attorneys and property owners. And there were bills floating in front of the legislature to challenge certain things. There was over 200 appeals on low-income housing sitting at the state appeal board to be heard. And the objective was, Vince and Tom said, please sit in on a meeting and just listen. And when we get through this meeting, we need to talk. So, at that meeting, they appointed a task force for to develop a assessment procedure for assessing low-income housing. They had lawsuits, they had appeals, they had all sorts of problems in front of them, and they asked me to head up that task force. And I got an education in the next 6 months. I went into assessors' offices, I went into the offices of people that own these type properties, researched law, researched the USDA and the whole bit, and found that there could be a way to assess them and consider every type of possibility in that assessment process. Now, again, you might say, why are you talking about this in Illinois when you talk about Kentucky? Well, my thought is that, I don't know if I want to say this or not, but I'm not sure that you maybe underassess these things in Illinois. But I'm going to tell you what I think, and then you do what you need to do from it, and then call me. The appraisal boards and the advisory opinions of the appraiser says, and Indiana also has some of these same characteristics, says that in assessing low-income housing, you must consider all the benefits that accrue from that property, from all this government assistance and the other things, and you must consider all the restrictions that's placed on that property by, for instance, not being able to sell it during a certain period of time, like 15 to 30 years, maybe 50 years, not being able to raise the rents without government without government approval, all sorts of restrictions. Has to be rented to a certain percentage of low-income people, and you have to consider the benefits. Now, benefits are the income that the tenant pays. In Section 515, it also includes rent subsidies that are paid for the tenants that can't come up with the full rent. It also considers low-interest loans of up to 1% interest. All of those are benefits. So you match what we did in Kentucky. We matched the benefits, considered the restrictions, and came up with a procedure to assess low-income housing. It's worked now for 12 years. Our appeals are less than probably a half a dozen a year. And we actually have clients that call me and say, would you get my property in compliance with the Kentucky law or Kentucky guidelines? And I work for the clients, and the assessors love it because they don't have to do that work. We're using the same guidelines as they use. So that's Section 515. And then you've got a low-income property that's called an IRS Section 42 low-income housing tax credit property. And these are very misunderstood. And some of the same restrictions apply to them as it does Section 515. As an example, you can't raise the rent without from going through some red tape. They can't be sold, or they have to be used for low-income housing for 15, sometimes up to 30 years. There's no interest subsidy on them, and there's no rental subsidies. But they do get a benefit up front when the developer is building the properties. They get a tax credit that can be used to offset taxes that's owed by IRS later on. So then when those tax credits are spent, they have no benefit to anyone. They are better housing, but those are the two main ones. And if you got these kind of problems in your county, first thing to do, you need to look at the law on it. And the current law, if I'm not mistaken, says basically that you take the operating statement of that low-income housing project and then you capitalize it out. So it's not really considering the benefits or the restrictions or the author of the law may have said, well, they're offsetting things. And I would not argue that point one way or the other. They may very well be offsetting things. But that's all I'm going to say about that. So we don't do hardly any low-income housing work in the state of Illinois because most of them are assessed down there, certainly not over-assessed, and maybe reasonably assessed. They're based on your state law, they are, if you use that procedure. One of the things you might get into, though, is you might get into a project like we got into in Louisville, Kentucky, where the University of Louisville wanted to set up what they call a single mom with children, if that's the right terminology. In other words, a mom divorced or whatever, or however she got there, with children. And they set up a 52-unit apartment complex to rent to these moms, and they set up a daycare center to take care of the kids while mom went to school. It's a very neat idea. They've done this 2 or 3 times. And their assessment we worked on and with the county and with the owners of these units to get them into an area that was agreeable to all the parties. So you might sometimes come across one of those real special deals, and it takes the county or the state regulation on it, or so to speak, won't work effectively because you've got all these mixtures of business and things like that. Any questions on low-income housing? Okay, let's move on. Hospitality, hotels, resorts. Not necessarily so much a special purpose property as it is, excuse me, that it takes special consideration. One of the things, again, in Illinois, that personal property is exempt. And I've seen many cases in Illinois whereby the hotel has sold, let's say, for $3 million, and the personal property might have been 15% of that, and they're still being assessed at $3 million because the personal property has not been pulled out of that sale, and in some cases those sales are used as comparable sales.
So what type of items would be included in the personal property portion?
I'm sorry?
What type of items?
What type of items?
Yep.
It would be your TVs, it would be your refrigerators, anything that have a short-term life. It could very well be microwaves, beds, living room suites, that sort of thing. And it typically, well, in the gas station as an example, we're going to get to that in a minute, never mind. But in hotels as an example, it would be those things. And they do add up to be a sizable amount of money. Again, maybe 10-15% of $3 million is not that much, but it's something that should be looked at because we do find that, and fortunately, when if we see one, we just call it to the attention of the assessor, and 9 times out of 10, they say, yeah, I agree with you, and they'll make the change on it when they can, and it's not a formal appeal or anything of that nature. And in many cases, they've already considered it. So if you ever get something from us that says, please consider this personal property, if you've already considered it, just send us a memo back, an email back, and say it's taken care of, and we're satisfied with that. We're not going to take it any further, but we do see a lot of times that is missed, and it's not intentional. It's just the way our system works. And we did have a hotel over here not long ago that was assessed like $200,000-300,000 over, and I just told the hotel owner to call his assessor, and he looked at me kind of funny. He said, "That's what you do?" I said, "Yeah," but I said, "It's a phone call." I said, "You got a copy of the appraisal? Take it to the assessor and tell him what you'd like to see done." And he called me back about a week later and said, "Yeah, they took care of it." So, it's interesting enough. I know that we do property tax consulting, and we represent owners a lot, like we do counties. And you might say you have a conflict of interest. We don't do that in counties we do work for. So if I've got a contract with your county for any reason, you'll never see me on the other side of the ledger. However, it's perfectly ethical for us to work on another case in another county somewhere else. And that's pretty much ethics and also the laws that we work under in most of the states. But I guess the interesting thing is that some of the best people and some of the best friends that I got are county assessors. I attend their conferences, I attend their training sessions. We go to 5 or 6 sessions a year just to meet and talk with people. And it's never in a confrontational manner. It is if it affects right or is it not. And I think everybody I've ever ran into, all they got to do to me if I ever filed an appeal is tell me why it's assessed that way, and generally I'm going to agree with it if they put the time in to do it. So I'm not saying that's true with all tax consultants. I've seen some real horsey butts out there, and you have to deal with those, and you have to deal with them. But if I ever come into your office for any reason, you're going to think I'm family. That's just the way I operate. So keep that in the back of your mind. But again, we look at hospitality and hotels. Those are sold on typically units of comparison. It's usually a sale price per square foot. You got this Super 8, it's got 40,000 square feet, and you've got 3 comps that's sold. You're pretty well on the line if they're Super 8s, and if they don't have these extra amenities. Now, if one of your comparables have a domed swimming pool, and the other 2 don't, and one of them are poorly built and the other 2 are not, you got to get good comparable sales to do that with. But there's enough market data out there to get that data. And we've always been a company that will share data also. So if you get to assessing some of this stuff that you feel like you need just a little bit of input to, call me, and if I got comparables, I'll share them with you. It's just that simple. Because the wheel makes a complete revolution. The more I can do for you, the better the world is going to be, and vice versa. You're too fast, Bob. The second unit of comparison would be the sale price per room, as an example. You got a Super 8 again, or a Motel 6, or a Hampton Inn, or whatever it might be. And by the way, you wouldn't compare a Hampton Inn to a Motel 6. It's just not the same thing. It's like driving a Cadillac, and I'm not down on Motel 6s, but it's like leasing your Cadillac at National or Avis as opposed to renting a, I don't know, I like Volkswagen, but I'll use that as an example. But your sale price per room is another example of a unit of comparison. And if you've got a Hampton that's sold for $60,000 a room, and you're comparing that to a Super 8, you can't use $60,000 a room. A Super 8 might be $45,000 or $50,000 or whatever, and a Motel 6 might be a lower number, and your local family 16-unit motel might be even lower. So your comparison to those 2, plus they're compared by the sale price based on income analysis, where you take the income, you take all the expenses, and do that capitalization process that we talked about earlier. Now, if you're doing new motels, it might pay you to call your state and get a franchise offering book. Let's say you're doing Hampton again, and you want to get some projections on different things and have to help you in your assessment. You can get a franchise offering book that tells you what units sell for across the United States. It tells you what the personal property dollar amount should be in an average Hampton Inn. It tells you what the average cost should be. It gives you all of this sort of stuff based on studies that they've done on hundreds of their Hampton Inns. So you don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel in a lot of the stuff, but you do have to do a little research and find the places where you can get the information that you need. Let's move on. Convenience stores. One of the harder properties to assess, and I didn't say appraise, but one of the harder properties to assess because you've got that personal property involved, you've got inventory, you've got a sale price, for instance, on a Amoco convenience store that's got 3,000 square feet. and then it's got 12 pumps sitting out in front of it, maybe 6 different pumps, maybe an island with 3 pumps on it, with two pumps on each side, and you got, say, 2 of those islands, so you got a total of 12 pumps, or you got 6 stations, if you would. I'm sorry, six islands, if you would. And if this unit fell for $1 million, that's not uncommon sale price, by the way. That's about where they work out. You've got $1 million sale. Included in that sale is your real property, your FF&E, or your personal property, your inventory. Sometimes it's a separate item, and your going concern business value, or your goodwill. And if you take these 3 convenience stores that you've got as sales, and you say, okay, the assessment on the one I'm dealing with is $1 million, it's just not. And we've had a number of these, and we simply, when we do, we ask the assessor to look at it. And if they've already considered it, not a problem. We have done studies that show out of actual sales in the market what percentage of the total sale is for the real estate based on many sales. What percentage of this is for FF&E, or personal property? That includes the pumps, that includes the tanks, that includes everything is not considered real property, and what percent of it is for inventory and goodwill. And we found that about 32% of it, doing studies in Kentucky, Indiana, and more studies in Kentucky, we found out about 32% of that sale price is for the personal property. So with that in mind, you do have to consider that. But they generally sell for the total price on a sale price per square foot. So if you got $1 million sale and you got a 3,000 square foot building, then it's selling for about $333 a square foot. If you've got a sale price, of $1 million, and you've got 12 pumps, physical pumps where you can drive up and put gas in your car, then studies have shown those can be anywhere from about $60,000 to $80-something thousand per pumping station, per pump, not per island, but per pump. Now these were research that was concluded about over the last 3 years, up until just recently. Another sale price indicator is the gallons of gasoline pumped annually. So if you've got a station that pumps 6 million gallons of gasoline, it may sell for, let's say, 50 cents a gallon. Well, you're not going to get a 3,000 square foot station to pump 6 million gallons. So let me back off of that. If you've got maybe 2 million gallons of gasoline, it may sell for 50, 60 cents a gallon. It may sell for less than that, it may sell for more than that. How do you get that information? You have to get it from the market of what sales are taking place, and do a lot of research. It's nothing easy, but there's a way to do it. And that's the reason they're called special purpose. Then you've got the sale price. It might sell per dollar amount of inside sales. For instance, the inside sales on this $1 million station might have been $400,000. Well, with that indicator, it might be worth $1.2 million. But you still have to go back and break down what that $1.2 million consists of between real property, personal property, inventory, fixture, goodwill, so forth. And then you've got the last one, which is your sale price based upon the income analysis. How much income did it produce? How much expenses did it have? And then allocations out after that. So even though it looks like it's an easy job to do, it's hard to do correctly. And your mom and pops are not going to have the kind of data you need, and you just have to have resources. We've been fortunate. We've done a huge amount of work on these sort of things. We've appraised companies that had 40, 50 locations and that sort of thing. And so we've got a lot of information on this sort of stuff, and I'll be glad to share it. So let's move on. Questions, anybody? Now, now I won't pretend that I don't have some folks out there, excuse me, that would disagree with me, and that's okay. What I'd like to do, if you disagree with me on any of the points I've made, or attempted to make, I should say, if you disagree with me, I didn't make the point. But on the point that I attempted to make, I'd really like to get a call from you, and I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to see why you feel the way you do, and I could very well be wrong. I have been wrong so much in my life that I consider that you can make, millions of dollars batting .300 in the majors. I can tell you I'm better than that, but I can tell you that I miss every once in a while. But if I am wrong, I'll go get my information, I'll dig it up, I will absolutely find out and share it back with you. But I learn every day from people that do what you do. And when you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you're ripe. And my philosophy is whatever I learn after I know it all, that's the most important thing in my life. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're talking to me. Other things to consider on a steel mill. We had the distinct pleasure of being contracted by Lake County, Indiana, working with attorneys out of North Carolina, representing them on helping them assess the 3 steel mills in Gary, Indiana. The 3 steel mills was US Steel, Metro East, and Metro West. And as an example, US Steel was 840 buildings. I'm thinking 1,700, 1,800, maybe 2,000 acres, with over 14 million square feet. And it was interesting, is all I can tell you. But it did bring out to us, if this would have been a 5-acre lot with 100,000 square foot building, with 5, say, 6 or 7,000 square foot buildings and the rest of it made up in one building, or that sort of thing, and an older building, the same thing would apply. Now, let me give you an example of what we ran into in that assessment. First of all, they ended up settling the case with the steel companies. I have no idea what they settled it on. I'm not going to talk about what we assessed it at, but it was, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers, I don't know. It had a lot of digits behind it, but it was an older building. It sat on the lake up there in Gary, Indiana. It was highly depreciated. It was buildings that wasn't being used. It was buildings only that had been abandoned but still there. It created all the assessment nightmares that you could possibly imagine. It had contamination, all kind of functional obsolescence. Let me give you an example. The interior of functional obsolescence was just that it was old. The floors were laid out in a way that the traffic didn't go good. The docks were in the wrong place. Some of them didn't even have docks. The functional obsolescence on the overall plant was that you had 840 buildings laid out over 2,000-3,000. I think it was maybe it's been close to 3,000 acres. I don't remember, but I know it was a bunch of acres. I know the smallest one we did, I think, was 800 acres. I think the other one was 1,700, and maybe just steel was on up there in over 2,000, maybe 3,000. Just a huge, huge plant up there. I'm told that in the movie Pearl Harbor, that they flew over U.S. Steel as a demonstration of what was hit in the bombing. Now, I've been told that. I don't know if that's true, but I've been told that. But functional obsolescence is you've got the raw ore that comes in. They made the steel there. And the first product was they brought the ore in on one end of the acreage, and then on the other end of the acreage, they have this big, huge 1-mile conveyor that is taken about a 30 or 40 foot length in steel, maybe about a foot high, and with all these rollers and compressors and heat, this 1 mile brings us through all these different rollers and heat and reducing it, stretching it out until you got to where you had one of these big rolls of steel that you fill in a transfer truck, transporting this across the United States. That was their finished product. And then that goes to Detroit, and it goes to all different types of fabrication plants and so forth. Well, the plant layout was that you had maybe on one end, you had the ore coming in, and then you had other plants, and you had the melting mills, and you had all this sort of stuff until about, sometimes it took over a mile and sometimes 2 miles transporting stuff from one location to the other to be able to do the next product or the next process. So the plant layout was just so functional obsolescent compared to a new plant where buildings were built side by side and then you conveyor belts between each other and so forth. And bottom line on this was we had major functional obsolescence interior, we had functional obsolescence exterior, multiple sites needed from start to finish, and it was one of those special purpose type of properties. Now that still goes from Gary, Indiana to different plants across the United States, like AK Steel in Newburgh, Indiana, and places like this, to be able to be pressed down more and fabricated into the different components that's needed for car manufacturing and that sort of thing. So we've had, in our experiences, some interesting stuff to work on. We've been privileged to work on glass plants, wire factories, tire companies, companies that make the steel and aluminum rim for Toyota and other places like that. So my experience has been, I've lived 2 lifetimes, and I'm glad to share it anytime I get the opportunity to. So, Bob, let's move on. One more time. Now, I guess it's time for question and answers. I'll try to have the answers if you've got any questions.
Again, press #5 to unmute your phone, and if anyone has any questions, fire away.
Well, don't hesitate. Just ask me one, and I'll fall right on my face. That would be a good objective for you. I'll do the best I can. Well, let's move on, Bob.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, with county property that's no longer being used, would you be the person that we would call to come in and give us an appraisal on that land prior to us putting it up for bid or for auction or whatever?
I could be. I've done that a number of times, and I'll be glad to talk with you personally.
Okay.
And do that if you'll give me the call, or just give me a number. I can call you back after this is over. I'll be glad to do it.
Yes. My name is Virgil Mayberry. I'm in Rock Island, Illinois. My telephone number is 309-230-8081. I currently sit on the county board here. I'm running for circuit clerk, but we do have land here that we're going to have to do something with, and I believe
I'll be
you're the man
glad to do it. And you can also, if you want a reference on what I do and how I do it, give some of the people over on the board at Montgomery County a call, and I'm sure they'll say that I do what I say I will do.
Oh, I believe it.
When I say I will deliver it.
Okay, well, I'm from close to your neck of the woods. I'm from Southern Illinois, St. Louis. Saline County, where Harrisburg, the town that got hit by the tornado. That's my hometown.
Sure, okay.
So I've been going through that. But yeah, if you'd give me a call after we get done, I would appreciate it.
I do appreciate your question, and also let's move on to one other thing, Bob. Just keep hitting. Hit it about 5 times in a row. This is an offer I said I would do for you, and this might be worth something to you. Hit it again. It might be worth something to you. But we've covered a lot of material, and go the other way. And we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And I will extend the courtesy of, and I said 30 minutes, I'd probably get on the phone with you and talk with you all day, but I will talk with you, answer any question you got, share with you, at least for 30 minutes if you want it, at absolutely no cost whatsoever. I'm interested in building relationships. The rest of it takes care of itself as you go down the road. And Bob, go ahead. And this is all my contact stuff. Didn't you say, Zach, that people will be able to go on and get this off the?
Yeah, they'll all have these slides.
Okay. So, but if you want to write down anything, I got an 800 number that I put out there because your budget sometimes don't allow you to do all the things you want to do. And other than that, I just want you to hit the button. I'm closing out with that. Got to do it quick. This is how I feel sometimes, but then it gets worse. Have an example. It gets like this and starts throbbing, and I've had a good time with you folks today, and if I can help you, call me. Good luck to everybody. Thank you.
If there's anyone else who has any questions, we can take them at this time. If not, I'd really like to thank Mr. Stuard and Mr. Sneed for making the trip over here and sharing their vast knowledge on special properties with us. It was really a pleasure, and I hope you all got something out of it. And again, Mr. Stuard has said that you can contact him. You should have the slides with his contact information. And we will see you next month, where the topic will be wind farms, siting and permitting of wind farms. And so, again, I thank you for joining us this afternoon, and that will conclude our program. Thank you.